people are hardy, thoughtful, and have a deep history of caring for the land. She is honored to work there and humbled by the magnitude and complexity faced by her family and community. She aspires to understand the ecology and economic structure of her region well enough to assist land managers with profitable and scientifically sound pasture renovation strategies that fit into the entire operation and landscape. Please join me in giving Annie a warm welcome. Did I write that? Really?
Oh, yes, I'm Annie. A little bit more about myself. I work for CSU Extension. I'm the regional range specialist on the eastern slope of Colorado. So I cover the plains. And is that fine?
Yeah, sorry. As Western slopers always look with a jaundiced eye towards the eastern slope.
Okay, thanks.
Suspicious eye, maybe.
Okay, yeah, and I cover the San Luis Valley too. And then also I have a rangeland restoration business that I've run for about 15 years in the state of Nevada and in California. So my business partners, they live in Elko. And I had the opportunity to come home and raise the kids at home. And I'm so happy to be back here. So I've been here for 3 years. So anyway, thanks for having me. So you guys have hopefully gotten a pretty good background in soil biology from this conference. And so much of what I do, because I'm in range management and help on the family operations, is I try to take the science and apply it. And so a lot of what this presentation is about is our experimentations in applying soil biology to the landscape. And so what I'm going to be doing today is I'm actually going to be presenting a case study of applying high fungal compost extract on Oswald grass-fed, which is near Cotopaxi, Colorado. And so it'll be a little bit more appropriate, I think, to this area. So let me try to advance the slide. I think I'm gonna have to use an icon. Now? Okay.
Forward them.
I can do it.
Okay.
Maybe. Sorry for the technical issues. It was working. Maybe you'll. Gosh. Let's try this. Oh gosh, I'm not getting it in. Yeah. Let's try stop sharing. And then reshare. I don't know if it'll help, but maybe I'm wondering if that's what's going on. Is there's two options? Maybe we'll try this one here. So anyway, while she's figuring that out, we'll talk. So over Christmas time, I was having dinner with my family, and I was talking to one of my cousins, Scotty, and Scotty just had shoulder surgery, and he's, the doctor said, "Now, Scotty, I want you to cut out red meat," and Scotty was like, "Hold on, like." Just stop right there. And over Christmas, and so we continued this conversation, and I said, "Scotty, what was going on with that? Well, really, what were you thinking?" And he said, I have 4 examples of grandfathers that, do we get it? I did. Here we go. Here's all my grandfathers who have worked into their upper 80s and early 90s from eating the way that we still eat now. And that is grass-finished beef. We only started, you know, we sell in the open market, but when we started late selling grass finish 18 years ago. So there is so much kind of energy behind the statement, we do it because Dad did it. And in our situation where you're 7 generations in and you go, okay, some things are working, and yes, we are doing it because Dad did it because it worked. So in this regenerative space, it's really important to kind of look at what worked and what didn't work. And it's so exciting now because we're at this place where we can use science to move forward. So in a nutritional sense, we did things, I think we've done some things right. We are from prime Dust Bowl country, and we've done some things wrong. And we've had to learn over the years, and we've evolved. And we have great examples. You know, civilizations fail because they haven't treated their soil properly. And so I'm so excited now because we have this whole other, you know, volume of knowledge to learn from to move forward. So we're at the nexus of applying kind of old traditions with new knowledge, and that is with soil health. And here's just an example of a Native American using the 3 Sisters technique. So what I'm going to talk to you about is that sort of ancient practice of composting, right? Like we've always, in the last 20 years, it's been this like very hippie thing, right? But really, we've been doing it for 10,000 years. And so I'm really, really honored to be able to work with Steve Oswald, just phenomenal producer on the Eastern Slope. And so I'm going to present the case study with him. So to understand kind of where we are, and this applies to the entire Arid West, really, I'm going to kind of try to get to the vastness of the issue. And I'm going to do that through looking at ecological sites. Does anybody here know what an ecological site description is? Understand? No? Okay. So basically, what ecological sites are is they are a community of vegetation. And the way that they were built was after the Dust Bowl Soil Conservation Service was established. And one of the big efforts through the Soil Conservation Service, which is now NRCS, was to map the soils. And so a soil scientist would come along and he would dig a hole in these different areas that looked different. And so they would map the areas that were loam, they would map the areas that were sandy loam, they would map the areas that were saline bottom, and then assign a vegetation community to these different map units based on topographic position and climate as well. And so on the plains, for example, we have 3 dominant ecological sites that take up about 12 million acres, 13 million acres. So to really understand these areas, these soil vegetation types, it's important to also look at the soil and the mechanisms in the, what's going on in the soil. So this is an example of how an ecological site can change with management. So if you look at this box right here, this is reference community. And what reference community is sort of like pre-European. And the community is dominated by Western wheatgrass. Does everybody know? Anybody know what that grass is? It's kind of about this tall. It's a rhizomatous grass. It's a very important component. Cool season grass. So it's got a bimodal growth curve, grows in the fall and in the spring. And then blue grama is our dominant grass. And then we have a few shrubs, winterbat and four-wing saltbush. So what happens with that particular community when it gets disturbed is we get a sod-bound blue grama state up here. And it kind of looks like this. And it's basically just a monoculture of blue grama. Well, if we've learned anything about soil biology, we've learned that we need diversity to feed the diversity of microbes. The other state that we get is this eroded state. This state occurs, it's invasive species. It occurs from either not grazing or plowing. So our ecosystem evolved with grazing. It evolved with the bison. And one of the important things about that is that when the bison came and they grazed, they were also inoculating the plains with microbes. So this is a lot of what our area looks like. And these sites have remained in this state since after the Dust Bowl. We know this. CSU has done research on this and they've tracked it. So to really understand why this landscape has stayed in this state, it's important to look at what happened to the soil. So we're gonna revisit the soil web. I'm sure you guys are all experts on the soil web. You guys feeling comfortable with it? I'm just gonna go through it really, really quickly. Basically, we have our plant. Plant takes in CO2, water, turns it into what? Carbohydrates. Some of those carbohydrates stay into the plant. The rest get exuded out, exudates out the roots, and they feed the soil web. They feed bacteria, the fungi, the protists. We have the larger microinvertebrates. Those things are the chewers, right? This whole food web is creating soil aggregates. So the structure is very, very important to our system, to our grasslands. So what happens when so here's great work by Dr. James White from Rutgers. Is anyone seen his research? Fantastic. I mean, it's just, to me, it's so amazing because I'm like, oh my gosh, the soil really is alive. It's so cool. So these are in these root hairs.
I'll admit, Wolfie.
There we go. We can see the bacteria right there. And then we can see them exuding out here. And so those bacteria are taking the nutrients and they're bringing them to the plant. And so what are these nutrients? Why are these nutrients important? Cell division in the soil profile for the plant. Copper, essential for making energy. Boron, translocation of sugars. The mineral of chlorophyll, core mineral of chlorophyll. Nitrogen and carbon dioxide, assimilation. We also need a lot of those things for the human body too, right? So what happens to the soil to the soil aggregates? I like to think of it this way. This is one way that Nicole explained it to me. She said that if you take coffee beans, you put those coffee beans through a grinder and you get it down to espresso, that's what's happening. So think about that visual in your brain. How does the water go through the whole coffee beans? Easily, right? But if you have espresso, the water is just going to sit on top. So there's a different mechanism that's really happening in the soil from plowing than there is from grazing. So when you're plowing, you are basically interrupting that communication between the fungi and the plant, right? They're shredding the fungi. In a grazed system, and this is an overgrazed system that has been continuously grazed, the cows will regraze the plant. And then the sugars, excuse me, the sugars that would normally go down into the soil profile, they're not doing that. So that connection is being lost. So it's a different mechanisms are happening to get to a similar state. So prior to really 2019, I mean, I've been doing a lot of reading about soil health. I've been learning a lot about it, but I hadn't really applied it very well. And my tools were for improving an area were grazing management, rotate differently, right? Well, here, is it very fair for me to go out to a ranch and say, let's rotate the cows differently, right? Like it's like saying, rotate from this piece of pavement to that piece of pavement. Other tools, herbicide. Bale grazing. Bale grazing is awesome. Most of the ranches that I work on are from anywhere from 10,000 to 1 million acre ranches. So does it make sense for me to say, let's bale graze? I love it, but it's not necessarily practical for large acreages. And then we have drill seeding. Drill seeding can work, but again, it's tough on large acreages. So here comes Steve. And Steve, I met Steve and he's like, Annie, I'd love some help with one of my pastures. And Steve is a grass finish operation. So I understand the importance of his rotation, how he's trying to rotate onto different types of land throughout the year. And here's an example of what we were looking at right here. Old farm ground. Old farm ground, toughest, the hardest thing to work on with no irrigation. So I just said, Steve, you know, I'm going to tell you this, and this is Steve right here in the middle. This is our workshop we did. Here's Nicole right here that we did last summer. So I said, Steve, we'll try to incorporate some of the tools that I know. So his goals were, of course, to capture every bit of water that's coming onto that ranch. He wants to basically transition that last pasture into a finishing pasture, figure out what we can get to grow there at all, increase production and diversity, and deal with the compaction. So we did our tests, our standard test, dig a hole, look at the compaction, look at the texture. The texture is going to tell us something about a lot about water infiltration, aggregate stability. This is his wife, Nancy. So you can kind of see what we're dealing with. This is all purslane. And purslane is a great indicator of a stabilizing weed. It's one of the first plants to come in after something has been plowed or after with bare ground. And you kind of know what's going on in the soil profile just by looking at the weeds. So for example, during the wintertime, this was just blowing soil, which is like one of the worst things for me. So what we did was Steve has got he does a lot of mob grazing, which is a great tool to have if he got it. So what he did is he high intensity grazed the weeds to knock out the competition before we put in a cover crop. And the idea of the cover crop was to try to boost the soil aggregation prior to transition it to perennial. So that year we had cool spring, we had great moisture, very little happened. It's like, oh shoot. So anyway, we started learning a lot more about soil biology. We read Nicole Masters' book. We went to a couple workshops like this one. I've been following Elaine Ingham for years. And one of the things that she said that really stuck with me for years was the fungal to bacterial ratio in grasslands. So if we look at this succession, we start with highly bacterial. That's ruderal. That's where Steve's pasture is right now. We want to be here. We want to be in the grasslands. So we want that even fungal to bacterial ratio. At the same time, we met Patrick O'Neill. Does anyone know Patrick? Great guy. I think he was supposed to be presenting here and I didn't stay, sorry. Patrick said, hey, Annie, we've got this great effort going on in the San Luis Valley. We had David Johnson come and speak about this high fungal compost, and the farmers were really interested in using this compost. And so we got like 18 farmers and ranchers to contribute up to 10,000. Not everyone contributed 10,000, but a lot of folks did, to creating this high fungal compost pile. And I was like, is anybody studying this? And he's like, no. And I said, okay, somebody needs to study this. Like, I don't care if it's, Pepsi. Like, let's put some effort into this. And so now I'm going to explain a little bit about the high fungal composting process. Basically, It's a process of composting that stays in an aerobic phase. And it leads to a fungally dominated compost. They start the compost with kind of a white wood chip, so cottonwood or aspen, something like that. And then they put native grass, manure, water. They water it about 70%. And then it stays aerated. And the way that, and it's never turned. And that's really, really key, because when you turn a compost, that's when you get bacteria or a dominance of bacteria. So here you can see the holes here. So basically what they do is that they put these PVC pipes down in here, and then after a couple of days, when the soil is settled, then they take those pipes out, and the aeration is from that process. You can make this on your own. Yes.
How deep are the holes?
Like this deep.
Clear to the bottom of the compost.
Yes, clear to the bottom of the compost. And this process is outlined in David Johnson has got videos of how to make this. The cool thing, the thing that I was most interested in is that you can make this yourself. So the industry of microbiology, the fertilizer industry has really taken this, and it's one of the fastest growing industries for selling product. And I'm coming from a background where inputs are a huge expenditure, and I love being able to do something yourself, especially if you have the product. Everybody's got manure, grass. All ranchers have manure and grass. We have horses, we've got manure, chickens, whatever. So that's one of the big reasons why I was so interested in it. So it stays in the thermophilic phase for 160 days. That lasts only 3 days. And then when the pile reaches 80 degrees, that's when you add the red wigglers. And so it's a vermicast process as well. And it composts a long time, a year to 18 months. So here's David Johnson speaking in the San Luis Valley to us. And here he's explaining that after 4 weeks, this is what the compost looks like. And it's highly dominated by bacteria. After 60 weeks, we have a dominance of fungi. We still have bacteria, which is obviously very, very important. But look at all the species that are in this compost. And if anyone was listening to Chris Nichols yesterday, we learned that it's really the diversity of species that keeps everything in check. So here are the stats on the compost. Right here, we've got basically 1 to 9 fungal to bacterial ratio. And here we've got really good protists. The protist level is really good. And those protists, does anyone remember what protists do? Basically keep the bacteria in check. Amongst other things, lots of other things. So we also learned from Nicole that we needed to add some tests, some monitoring. We measure our bricks. Do we have farmers here in here? Why do we measure bricks? We do a plant tissue test. We do a plant tissue test on a weed and a grass. And that plant tissue test tells you if the conditions are favoring the weeds or if they're conditions favoring the grass with minerals. So are the weeds taking up minerals differently than the grasses? Look at the minerals, look at the soil biology, send a test in to see what our ratios are. And then we're reading the weeds. Weeds tell an incredible story, and they also do a lot of work. And so our concepts of weeds, I think we need to change our concepts of weeds for us. Animals graze weeds, so a lot of times we don't think of weeds as necessarily a bad thing. And they're doing a lot of work for your landscape. So our new goal is to transition back to coffee beans and to do it in an arid environment. And so this high fungal compost had not been tried on a dry environment, has only been done in an irrigated space. So we really wanted to figure out if it would work or not. Here's some of the testing that we did. We can see we've got really great bacteria, pretty good bacteria. We have very, very little fungi. In fact, we are in the very poor range.
So
Protozoa or
that's a soil test on seeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is just our nutrient panel. And we're dealing with this field right here, the cheatgrass field. That's what I call it. It grows cheatgrass really well. Here is a plant tissue test. And if you look at this test, we're looking at green needlegrass up here and the bindweed. So what I did was I sampled the native grass and then I also sampled the weed. And so I chose the bindweed because there was a lot there. And we can see what minerals are being taken up differently. So if we look at nitrogen, it's very similar. Phosphorus is pretty similar. What can we see that's very different? Manganese and copper, manganese and boron. So if we're going to add some trace minerals, we would add those. So our strategy would get, again, is high intensity graze. So we're grazing that cheatgrass really, really early to knock back the competition. Now we added some diluted high fungal compost extract. And that's the way that we inoculated the soil. So what we did was we took seed, we coated the seed, put it through the drill, then we also sprayed with extract. Result, amazing cheatgrass. Yeah.
Seed with what?
With extract. So what we did was we took the compost, we made an extract out of it, we put the seeds through that.
24 hours.
Not a tea. Basically what you do is you just put in a cement mixer and then you put it out on a tarp and you dry it and then put it through the drill. It needs to be dry though, because otherwise it won't go through the drill very well. So we grew this amazing cheatgrass. I'm so good at growing cheatgrass. We did get some triticale and radish. We also had problems with deer. I mean, holy cow, they just loved this. So pasture renovation in 2021, did the same thing. We high intensity grazed. We did a warm season cover with sorghum Sudan, some millets. We did a cool season cover. And then we did a concentrated high fungal compost extract that we got based straight from Dave West, who has this. He made this product. I mean, we could have made it ourselves, but we'd have to wait. So I didn't want to do that. We had incredible results, amazing results. We also had great moisture. But if you see here, and this is kind of in the way, what I did was we coated the seeds again. See, we didn't really see a huge difference, but then I sprayed into meter squares. And if anyone's been out there, have you been out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got these perfect meter squares. It was like, oh my God. And such an aha moment for me. I remember I love these aha moments because they're just like, oh my gosh, we learned something. Yeah, it's amazing. So I went to Steve and he's like, I don't think there's any difference. And I was like, well, I'm gonna go look. And so I went out there and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I just like ran back and I was like, Steve, you gotta go out and look, and we were completely floored.
Did you spray the extract?
We sprayed the extract.
Did you do that when the moisture started picking up, when it started to get wetter?
Yeah, and we learned a lot about timing. And I tried to leave room for questions because and I love that you have questions because we did so many things wrong and we've learned a lot in the process. So we just put this exposure cage on after that had all been grown up because the deer were just starting to come on, but this sorghum Sudan with no irrigation was like this tall. So we had really incredible results on the areas that we sprayed. The other result that we had that was very significant to me was the total suppression of cheatgrass. So in those meter square plots, we have no cheatgrass. And so to me, that was very, very significant because I get asked very often to speak on different herbicide controls. And it's harder for me to speak on herbicide controls when we have something that we're starting to see that's not an herbicide control. So by turning on a different signal, we're getting a totally different result. These are some of the weeds that are growing out there and some of the grasses. And this is an oat grass right here. No, this is oat right here. What I learned is that oat grass as a cover is a really good grass to use for mycorrhizal fungi. So it really establishes mycorrhizae. Whereas some of the other weeds out there are non-mycorrhizal species. They do not process minerals with the addition of mycorrhizae. So pigweed, amaranthus, those types of species. Sorghum Sudan is also a very good root mycorrhizal species.
Karen.
Oh no. Sorry about that. What else do I want to say about this? So when we talk about reading our weeds, this is a huge part of pasture recognition. Look and see what you have out there, because weeds have a different root, and those different root structures are doing different things in the soil profile, and they're also telling you a story. So if you have any weeds in the brassica family, for example, those are non-mycorrhizal. So that'll tell you this part of the pasture does not have a lot of mycorrhizal fungi. If you have red root pigweed, same thing. If you have those colonizer species that are really spreading out, purslane, prostate knotweed, that's another weed. Those species are doing their work and stabilizing. But the other thing that I've learned is that many of our weeds are allelopathic. And so if they get really, really established, cheatgrass, for example, it's allelopathic, it creates its own conditions to not allow other species to come in. So what does compost extract do? So this is really important. When you're putting on the extract, it's not like you're taking all these species, like you're taking the fungi, you're taking this bacteria, you're taking this protist, and you're putting it on. You're basically taking those enzymes and metabolites, spores from those species. That's what you're putting, that's what you're using, that's what's in the extract. Also, because this is a vermicast process, when the worms are vermicasting, they are changing the soil chemistry. So you're getting more humic acid from that vermicast process, more nitrogen, more phosphorus. So you're getting some minerals, but it's mostly these exudates, enzymes. And those are the ones that are going to turn on the quorum sensing process. So Chris Nichols did such an amazing job of explaining this yesterday, but basically what she said is the plant says to the microbes, I need something. And all of those species work in concert together to perform a process. So that plant says, I need phosphorus. And the fungi and the bacteria work together to go and get that that phosphorus available to the plant. So yes, this extract is not necessarily providing nutrients, it's enabling the microbes to mine the nutrients. And I think that this is one thing that we've thought in the past. Compost is recomposting nutrients, but it's really recomposting, it's putting on these, on biology, quorum sensing. And of course, restoring microbial diversity in soil. I think I really explained this. So what have we learned? We've learned a lot about the weeds. We've learned to change our mentality about what these specific weeds are doing here, and to not get so uptight about the weeds being there. We've increased nutrient availability through the biology. We've really learned when to plant. So in a non-irrigated system, you really have to think about, okay, are we going to plant at the end of the spring? Are we going to plant during the monsoons? Really what we're going to do is we're going to watch the weather. And if we're not going to get anything, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to waste money. The important thing is to have your stuff ready to go when we do get moisture. And this 2021, we were ready to go. We had seed, we had extract. When it looked like we were setting up for 10 days of rain, we just went crazy. And I think that that is really, really important. We did learn quite a bit about how to graze cheatgrass to knock back that competition, when to graze it. Steve grazed it at about 900,000 pounds per acre. So it was a very, very dense 200 cows in a very small area and moving them every couple hours.
What stage of growth?
Oh, that's a great question. Food stage. So obviously not when they've gone to seed that high. And one of the reasons why you graze cheatgrass at that stage 2 is from a nutritional standpoint. So in a grass finish operation, you've always got to be thinking about what's the nutrition like. Because otherwise, you're going to lose weight. And anytime you use cows to do any sort of restoration, you need to think about what's the nitrate level in these weeds right now? What stage, how much protein is in this grass right now? That's one way that bricks can really, measuring your bricks can really come in handy, so you can get a sense of the nutrient level. If your bricks is 3, a sharp line of 3 and below, your nitrates are high. You don't want to graze them. Let's see. We discovered, so the ranch is from about 10,000 down to 5,000. This particular pasture is at 7,500. We learned what grew at that elevation. Our triticale did great. Sorghum Sudan, proso, and foxtail millet, amazing. Radish did okay. Oats did really well. Hairy vetch did really well. We learned to use the concentrated level of extract. And one of the trials that I'll be doing this year will be looking at different concentrations, because that can really add up financially. Our water infiltration went from 12 minutes to 5. So that's huge. And our active fungi is low, but it's increasing, and probably our boron was definitely low. So the goals for this year, always building organic matter and carbon, capturing water, increase fungi to increase the bricks, so increasing that network. If we do a cover crop this year, it will be with oats, buckwheat, chicory, triticale, maybe sorghum Sudan. We'll add some trace minerals. We'll probably add a carbon source, so we'll add some humate and inoculate, and we'll apply it as a slurry. So you can put all those things together and apply it as a slurry. I am very, very lucky that my neighbors, the Purvises, and my dad, they have been farming and ranching forever, and they're very mechanical. So I can say, hey, Dad, can you build me a slurry sprayer? And he's like, yeah, I got it. And these are, all the people that I've learned, not all the people that I've learned from. David Johnson, obviously, I'm really, really impressed with his work. Dr. Ingham, and also David just sharing his information with us. It's so incredible to share this knowledge. Dr. James White, he's the one from Rutgers that's done all the research on root hairs and the rhizophagy phase. It's really interesting if you want to geek out, look at one of his videos. Patrick White, who really just an incredible agronomist who spearheaded this effort in the San Luis Valley. I can't really thank Patrick enough for learning and having such a great ability to share knowledge. Dave and Kelly West, they are the ones that that scaled up this compost, made it for us. My boss, Bruce Fickenshire, I worked for CSU, and I was like, this stuff is kind of out there, and there's no one on campus doing this kind of work. And he was like, Annie, the ranching community is so into it. I mean, I gave a workshop with Nicole Masters, and I had to turn people away. I had 80 ranchers and large scale ranchers too. And I was like, hey, we're doing this. Are you okay? And he's like, yeah, great. Mike Bartolo has been super supportive. Ron Meyer, he's been one of the economists that's helped out with our trials. USDA ARS, Steve and Nancy Oswald. We worked off the Western Sayer grant. I have to thank all the farmers and ranchers that I serve because we're all in this together. The Livingston family, one of the things that I didn't talk about was we were doing a similar trial on the Eastern Plains, the Livingstons, and this fall I was out there and Kent said to me, and we were looking at some of the places where we had sprayed different extracts, and he said, you know, we have slightly higher production on this grass, but the interesting thing to me is I put these cows out in a 1,000-acre pasture, and they camped out in this place where you put high fungal compost. And I was like, well, you're just now getting around to telling me this? Because we did not do a forage sample. You know, by the time November came around, I just didn't think it was going to be accurate enough to take a forage sample then. So so some of the work that we will be doing will be on forage analysis, because I think it makes perfect sense that the Brix would be higher in areas where you put this and the nutrient content is higher and the cows know it. So we will be doing, that's anecdotal, but I think it's important. And a special thanks to Nicole, because Nicole has really helped me take these, the science on kind of like a microscopic level and apply it on a broad scale. And that's it. So I think we've got plenty of time for questions. Yes.
Yes. So don't answer this if I missed it, but how are you getting the extract out of the compost?
Yes, that's a great question. Really great question. So the process, well, shoot, can we go back?
Yeah. And as part of that, why are you're adding another step that's harder for individual ranches to do by making that extract? Why not just
put the compost on? Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I did skip right over that. Putting compost out on a pasture is a lot more, putting a solid material, you have to make a whole lot to do that. And so by making the extract, you can spray it on.
But it doesn't, if you have compost in a very big area.
Yeah, you can just use the compost. I'm dealing in large pasture sizes. So to me, it makes a lot more sense to use the extract and to coat seeds. So,
and one additional question.
Yes.
To it. Have you found any food sources that you can feed to the microbes in your extract to make the extract go farther?
So that's a really good question. So that's the reason why we're going to add humate. Because basically when you're adding humate, you're adding a carbon source. So you're supporting the microbial population.
You mean like folic acid?
Yeah, you can use folic acid or humic acid.
And then just dilute it with water?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's what we're going to try. And then we'll also put some trace minerals in there. The other things that you could do would be like a kelp to feed it. We might do some test plots with that.
Can you address in that same vein slurry versus extract? What's the difference?
Yeah, so a slurry sprayer is basically, so when you have a sprayer, you've got the nozzles on the sprayer and they come with those screens on the sprayer. Well, this extract is not perfectly clean. And so it doesn't go through a sprayer as well as water would or something that you'd be getting out of a jug. So what we did is we took out the screens or put in a filter that was not as fine filtered. With a slurry, you can put other stuff in there, and it comes out. It's like basically like a fire hose, and then you're just spraying it over with a truck, and you're just spraying it with that.
Just waving the nozzle around.
Yes, yeah. And then you don't have to worry about things getting clogged, those sprayers getting clogged. And the filtering process is it's a lot of work. When we got the extract directly from Dave West, it was pretty clean, but still there's a lot that settles down in the bottom. If you make it yourself, which we did make it ourselves too, it wasn't as clean. And so we were spending so much more time unclogging those filters. So that's, so basically the way that you make it, let me go back. So these are our trials right here. We also, I mean, you can do it on a very large scale too. But basically here's our sprayers right here. Here we go. So here, this is one of the small extractors, and it goes into this big tank here. But basically what you do is you take like 3 buckets of the compost and you add it to this. I think this is 100 gallons right here. And then there's like a big net inside. It's kind of like a big tea bag, and it gets forced. And there's a motor through here that's forcing air through. And then the exudates get forced outside of that tea bag, and then they go into this big tank here. The way that we did it is we just I took like a 50-gallon drum and I agitated it. I had a leaf blower. I agitated it with a leaf blower for the same amount of time that they did, and then strained it. So it was like a very, kitchen process, really. And that's like, if we decide to make extract on our own, which I'm sure we will because of the efficacy of it, I would maybe, I know that Dave might be building those, but I might just have my dad build one. And David Johnson has got, I think, a video on how to make one. So you could just look at that. Yes.
Dr. Ing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can you get it through a center pivot?
What's that?
Could you get it through a center pivot?
Yes. So I think that if it was, I think you could put it through the pivot if that is something that we will be trying this year. But I'll be interested to see if it will clog. I know that a lot of people do it if you have like flood irrigation, they'll just put it right into the ditch, or gated pipe, you could do it that way. It's not that chunky. It really isn't. It's pretty clear. So.
And then do you have a report or something that has the ratios and how you actually make the compost?
Yeah, let's see. Where is that slide? Okay, so with our test plots, we did essentially 25 pounds of compost per acre, which was about 83 gallons of extract. And this is very concentrated. So like I said, our tests are going to be this year, we're going to be diluting it a little more because before it was 2 pounds of compost. And so probably what I'll do is I'll experiment with 2 pounds up to 25 pounds and see, if we get a difference. Because if we get a result with 5 pounds, that's a lot less. That will go a lot further if you've got, the source.
But the ratio, actually, how you make the compost, how much would you call it?
That is a question that you would have to ask Dave West. Yeah.
David Johnson has videos.
Yeah.
It's your best resource. And there's really no certain recipe that he recommends. It's just make it.
And it's the time.
The time that, how can it go through pivot? Can it go through just make it work? Like, we're farmers, right? That's what we do. Just make it, buy it, and get it out. Somehow, sprayer, 2x2 on the seed, it just go,
Don't like use like a screen filter or something like that to ensure you don't clog up.
Exactly. If you're worried about what you're doing, I put it through drip. I thought I'd have 180 mesh screen, but that we're talking about microbes here. They're not going to clog anything. That the residue and that goo or whatever you may get, if you make it yourself or whatever, do what's appropriate for how your application. But there's, don't fight it. Don't overcomplicate it.
Don't overcomplicate it. Just start it. Start the process.
Do something. Do trials like Steve's doing. And
so one of one of the big things that we did learn, even if you get the extract, is that if you have it in your big tank, you will get a slurry at the bottom of the tank. And so you've got to have some way to just don't put that slurry basically into the tank that you're spraying. You will get settling down at the bottom. The other thing that we've learned is how important it is to kind of agitate that while it's in the tank. So that's an important process. I don't know, just ask any more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious if you guys are losing any biodiversity by drying the seeds after inoculating them, and if there's another way to like.
You know, I've asked Nicole about that, and she said around the world, this is the way we've done it. If you put it in the drill wet, it will not go through the drill. But
couldn't you like drill and then squirt or something like that?
And I've also seen people take like a very, very concentrated, you know, they'll just concentrate the extract and put it that way in a squirting pattern. In fact, that's how we applied it at my family's in Los Angeles. Is we put it through we basically adapted the drill to do spray, like a very concentrated spray that went down. So that's another way that people are doing it. So one of the things that I was talking to Nicole about with the Johnson Sioux is that most of the Johnson Sioux product that I've seen in Colorado has not worked very well. And one of the reasons for that is people stop watering it. And it's because we go into the wintertime and they're like, well, you know, it's freezing or it's getting too hot. We don't have enough water. You've got to keep watering it. And so I've talked to her about some different sorts of processes where you can get high fungally dominated compost. And some of their work they're doing in Montana is they're just taking white wood chips, they're laying the manure, putting straw on top of that, and they put a geotextile fabric, and they just do these sort of big windrows, but it has to be watered. But that way and then you put the worms, or the worms will find it. The vermicompost process keeps it warm in Montana. And really it was the vermicomposting process that kept this fungally dominated compost warm. Because in the San Luis Valley, it gets to like 30, 40 below. And if you would dig down deep in the pile, you could feel the warmth in the pile. So even if it's frozen on top, if the worms are in there and they're doing their job, it's not going to be frozen.
So they didn't heat that building? It just, in the compost.
It's a greenhouse. It's a greenhouse.
Yeah,
and
I
it's
saw the plastic
got,
cover.
yeah, no heat. Yeah. And I think it's partially that big thermal amount of worms that you get in there that are really heating up the compost. And some of the composters that I've seen, you know, people give up because they think that nothing's going on in those composters over the winter time. But what you could do is you could just let it go over the winter, and then when the spring starts up again, you can water it and then get it going again. But that's going to take a while. So yes, question.
We have a chat question.
The extract you're just doing because it goes further than spreading just because I know I was looking at Dr. Johnson's work down in Arizona. And it seemed like they were spreading straight compost.
They spread straight compost.
Pounds.
Yeah.
Per acre.
Yeah, and for us, it makes no sense to do it on, to just put solid compost on. It makes a lot, because we're not really farmers. I mean, kind of our customers, but it makes more sense to do an extract.
You haven't heard of any way to shortcut the process. I mean, a year is a long time to wait for your soil amendment before you can get.
Yeah, and I mean, I've just heard that kind of around the world too, that it's it's the time to let all of those species kind of multiply, and especially fungi. That's the process. Yes.
I
chat. So I'm curious about the long-term implications and goals. Is the idea that eventually with rotational grazing, soil and plant health on the levels could be self-sustained without continued input of the extract-seeding cover crop?
That's a very good question. So the long-term goal would be to get this pasture and any pasture to a place where it's self-sustaining. And that is a very, very important question. It's something that I didn't bring up. The goal with converting any type of cropping system to a native grassland system is to allow the microbes to start regenerating and doing their thing, making the system, you know, closing the loop on the system. We're not, you know, we're not going to graze in a way, like we've learned enough about grazing management that we're not going to graze in a way that is going to be closing that carbon loop. We know enough now to not graze in that way. We also know that we don't want to be constantly putting inputs. So the idea for this is to get this to a perennial system, a diverse perennial system where we're not having to add anything else. And that is very different than farming, really, where you're taking off, where you're disrupting the soil more.
I had a question. I don't know if it's something that you have done as of yet or want to wait till you really know what sort of extract you're doing now. But have you looked at what the return on investment is going to be? So upfront, how much is it going to cost a rancher per acre? And then what is the short and long-term return on investment? And then as well as the incentives for the added protein and the growth.
I'm sorry that I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. This process is not very expensive, especially if you're making it on your own. And you're just adding very, very small amounts. You're basically tickling the system. That is something that we will do, particularly when I have a better sense of the concentrate that can work, but there's so many other variables when you're in a non-irrigated system. But that is something that definitely we will do. Yeah. Yeah.
You failed when you mentioned perennials and alfalfa, and then I see you don't do any of those in these covers. Is there a reason you pulled the alfalfa out of your seed?
I personally love alfalfa. I use alfalfa all the time. This particular mix was from green cover, but on our mix that we have on the Eastern Plains, we've got alfalfa in that mix. Alfalfa is such a great species to use, and there's some really great dryland alfalfa species too. The reason why I love alfalfa is it can grow in a kind of a high pH type system, but it just got that amazing taproot. So I think that is a very good question. Why do we not use alfalfa? I would absolutely use alfalfa, and we have, yeah. And in fact, right now we've got this really exciting trial going on with BYU and University of Nevada, Reno, where it's our ruminant bypass trial. And we're taking a dryland alfalfa and we're coating the seed and putting it through the rumen, because most seeds break down in the rumen. And so if we can figure out a way to get cows to do the seeding and have them do the inoculation as well, I mean, that's my ultimate goal. That is my ultimate goal, is to figure out how to get the cows to do it. We've got a super exciting trial going on, and I've learned so much about what seeds pass through the rumen and which ones don't pass through the rumen, and how we can coat them to get them to do that. Because if we can get cows to pass through the rumen, we can reseed the plains. We can reseed what's missing. You know, so I'm very excited about that. And I've also learned a lot about, you know, the inoculation process that the bison did. I mean, the bison played an enormous role in re-inoculating wherever they went. So if we can mimic that, I think that we've got the chance from going from, you know, 6 million acres of sod-bound Louisiana to a more diverse mix. So this is one branch of what we're doing. We also have a events, GPS coloring study that we're doing. And my idea is, okay, we're going to tell those cows where they're going to be. We're going to feed them the seed. We might put some inoculant down in the trough, and we're going to tell them what we need, where we need to distribute the seed. I know it's like futuristic, right? But I think if we can put it all together, it will be powerful. Yes.
Did you have another slide with your more cover crop? Because I thought I saw a list up there with plantain on it. There were a few things that didn't quite write down that I wanted to.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Oh my gosh.
Every time anything happens.
Don't let anybody else come in. Or like come in here. Yeah, I can't. Chicory. So you asked about chicory.
Well, I saw plantain was on there.
Oh, plantain, chicory.
I don't know a lot about forage, but I know cows can get their medicine from their forage. So like, what are you throwing? My language. Yeah. What are you throwing into the mix to give them like all their medicine, everything? Like that's
such a fantastic question. Absolutely, that's like my favorite. I'm so excited about. One of the reasons why I get excited about that question is I was in Nevada for 15 years prior to coming home. And when I came home, I was talking to my great uncle about pasture size. And I said, in Nevada, they've got like really, really big pastures there. And the cows are just as fat as they are here. And we're using similar genetics. So why is that? And he's like, 30 years ago, we had really, really big pastures too. And one of the advantages of that is that the cows have a diversity of species to graze on, and they can expand their medicine chest. When they've got issues, they know where to go. Well, when you parse up pastures really small, they're very, very limited as to what they can graze. So the beauty, so one of the most innovative ranchers that I know, what he does is he's got and partially it's because his ranch is set up this way, but he's got native range here, and then he's got a pasture here, which is covers. And so the cows, the way that he does his rotation is he'll set it up like this. Actually, there's no fence right here. He'll move them, but they can go into here and then they come out and they go back and they come out. And depending on, and he's got incredible weight, and he's got them on native forage a lot. But if you follow Fred Provenza's work at all and you learn about nutrition, you'll learn that animals will go and they tend to graze on sort of their high protein species in the morning, and then they'll go back into the range and get more carbohydrates. So adding that diversity into the rotation is absolutely crucial for weight gain. And so, great, we got it up.
That should work.
That was one of the reasons why we added a fairly diverse mix, not necessarily knowing exactly what those species were going to do from like a medicinal standpoint, but having a diverse enough cover crop to, to allow for just that same concept. Oh, we did have alfalfa in that first one. Collards, beets, flax, safflower, basilia. Basilia would be wonderful. We did a study, I didn't do the study, but the ARS lab did a study with all these just wonderful graduate students that followed around the cows for the spring. And what they found was that the cows ate 40% of their diet came from forbs. And that is research that I think is incredibly important, because we always think of cows just eating grass, right? They got 40% of their nutrition from forbs, and a lot of those forbs, of course, have those secondary metabolites that are medicinal for them. So the idea of food as medicine is something that that is something I think that we need to start paying attention a lot more to. And it's so funny how nutritionally we know so much about a cow's nutrition, what their nutrition needs to be, you know, when they're reproducing. You know, we have these growth curves and, you know, how much nutrition they should be getting and putting out the free choice mineral. And if we knew half of what we know about animal cow nutrition that we do humans, I don't think that we'd have as much of a conception rate problem. Yeah, so that was the mix that we used. For us, the alfalfa actually didn't come up. Clovers, we had good clovers. Spring barley did really well. Triticale did really well. Our collards and beets did great. We saw no flax, phacelia, safflower, chicory, or plantain. None of those came up.
Did you go back another year later to see, or was that same field that you did next?
Same field, and yes, none of those species came up. I know, such a bummer, because I really, really wanted that chicory to come up.
It still will.
I hope so.
We'll
publish the results, and hopefully it'll come up next year. Yeah, but it's so cool to see how this pasture has gone from that, actually bare ground, you know, 100, you know, it's like patchy where it's like 100% first lane and then 100% cover of cheatgrass to this mixture of weeds and perennial grasses. So it's starting to transition, and I think that we've learned a lot of patience in terms of letting it do its thing. So I think we're getting there. Yes.
I was working at the CSU Research Farm in Fruta,
nice.
Retta.
Yeah.
She was doing a study there. Similar kind of a deal, but she had laid it out with larger plots, and then her and Seth were applying compost, urea, and control plots. And so it's quite a checkerboard pattern.
Yeah.
As a research assistant, I'm not allowed to know what the treatments are. So I come in the morning and I would set irrigation. And so I was going to that field and monitoring the moisture and that. And it was fascinating to me that I was watching the blackbirds that were attracted to certain specific plots, and they were feeding there.
Yeah.
So that to me was a very visual of the soil food web in action. The fact that we had applied compost, I knew what compost was. So the fact that we applied compost and that attracted in the birds, so that completes the cycle. But what was more fascinating to me was that in the afternoon, the sparrows would come in and other diversity of wildlife, and they're feeding from other areas. So that is an ecosystem service.
Yeah.
That the application of compost brought in more wildlife. Of course, they're pooping and peeing there on site, which is building the whole system up.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a fascinating part that, you know, unfortunately wasn't captured in the study.
Yeah.
It's an observational thing that's hard to quantify how many birds per meter and that.
And that was one of the things that I learned. So I work with Ron Meyer and Mike Bartolo on kind of the study design. And when we did strips, there was so much variability in the soils of the strips that I said, we need to do smaller plots because we need to really reduce that variability in the plots. But it was so fascinating when we actually did those big long strips. And so they really complicated the study. But I love that visual. I do love that visual. And I loved at the Livingston, you know, that Kent was like, yeah, we're camping out in your spot. And I'm like, you know, and he didn't want to tell me for like he didn't want to tell me for like weeks. And he's like, I'm sorry, Masha moved on. And I was like, no, that's actually very, very interesting. Let's explore that further. So we will. That's part of the scaling up of the research. And you know, Extension's role really is to get the information out there, but Extension's role is also to go to CSU and say, hey, we have 18 farmers and ranchers in San Luis Valley that want to see this. Can we get some energy into it? So I'm also hoping for that too. Yes. Are you like amen? Yeah. Oh, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
I agree. Amen.
Have you seen any, two questions. One, you did your foot by foot plots, and I wondered how much meter plot.
Yeah, 2 meters.
Yeah, meter plot. How much creep there was beyond the borders.
It's so interesting that you say that because we just had very little creep, right? You saw them. It was like, boom, there's a square. And I really wanted it to creep out a little bit more because I love the idea. I mean, if you imagine this checkerboard floor, you know, spraying here and here and here and here and letting it expand out. Yeah. That's something that I'm going to look at this year, is if we are getting essentially corn signaling going out beyond. I'm really over that because when we think about 1,000-acre pastures, 5,000-acre pastures, 20,000-acre pastures, and then it gets a little bit more complicated. Yeah.
And another question, was there any comparison done with non-fungal dominated compost, more standard 10-week compost as opposed to 1-year compost?
Kind of. So I did a trial at the Livingstones that we will be replicating, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to have time to get the data up, but we did what was called the Lanford mix, which was like a dairy manure. We did microbes just from, I think it was like a microbes plus a micronutrient. We did just straight NPK. We had really good results on the Lanford mix, and we had great results on that microbial plus micronutrients. I was interested in this because you can make it yourself. So, question back there.
If you're going out trying to find compost from different people who are making it, is there, aside from a lab test, is there ways you can tell if it's a more fungal dominated compost just by your senses?
Well, it smells good for one.
So it'll smell different.
It actually smells good.
It smells better.
I know that's not very scientific, but you can really tell if compost is not good if it smells bad. And Nicole was telling me that there was a study done with solely urban people, and they smelled different composts, and they could tell which ones were the better compost or the more fungally dominant compost versus the highly bacterial compost.
So you're saying that a more fungally dominated compost will smell better, relative to the bacterial.
Yeah, and it's like, I think it's that jasmine that's being excreted, which is like partially it's that, but that's like the rain smell that we all love. The other thing about this compost is that it's kind of like a little bit clayey. It's kind of slimy and clayey. It's not like the fluffy compost.
It's not like the mulch that's sold as compost.
It's not, no. And that's actually one of the reasons why I like using an extract with it too, because to put it on, it could be like you'd have to dry it out, put it in the manure sprayer or spreader. I think it'd be kind of like spreading, like horse manure, how it's like just like in the wintertime, it's like flinging out, hitting you in the back of the head.
Along those lines, so if you're looking for a good compost that has high fungus, it must have a lifespan, like and storage requirements. I'm thinking about people trying to get a commercial with this, and they put it in a bag and it sits in a warehouse and it's really hot.
No good.
Yeah. So same with the tea. How long can it live?
It's living, right? Something about this. It's a living organism. So right. Treat it like a living organism. Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of people that are selling dead stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure, and highly bacterial. I love the stuff that they're doing in Montana, which some of the bigger files that it's not being returned in different parts of the pasture. It's got great application.
The other thing to ask on the composters is if they're using proper cellulose, like you were saying, with the wood chips or a straw as opposed to leaves, that promotes more fungal dominance. Then you can also find that when you add some of those products, you actually get fruiting, and mushrooms will actually come up on the pile, and that would be an indicator of its fungal presence.
Yeah, we use
8-month-old compost compared to 14-month-old compost is exponentially higher in diversity of species of fungi. So you can have highly fungal compost 12 months old, and it might have, say, 500 species of fungi, and 14-month-old might have 5,000 species. And you've got diameter of the hyphae of the fungi. So there's, you know, there's a lot to it, and no, you can't really, without testing or, you know, experience with people and knowing the process, probably come up. I make highly bacterial term compost that smells exactly like Dave West compost, but you know, it's not Dave West, which is Johnson Zoo style, you know, 14-month-old stuff. So it's, you know, it's really that time so far, unless someone can figure out how to speed it up. But right now, it's that time that the testing that David Johnson's done, Patrick O'Neill. I think you have Patrick White up on your thing. I'm pretty sure.
Did I really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The testing that we did with Dave West, first year compost, that was 3 years ago, I think now. But, you know, it was amazing to see that 12-month change in both the hyphal diameter, the, you know, bacteria fungi ratio, and the amount of species, which has also been done by David Johnson. Yeah. But it's, you know, leaves, or, you know, they made it, I think, pure alfalfa, just straight alfalfa in the bioreactor, he called it, and they get similar product at the end. Yeah.
So it's the formula basically going to be don't turn it, give it plenty of time, and sounds like kind of more wood.
Yeah, and then make sure it's aerated too. So it's not in an anaerobic stage. It's aerated with those.
But a lot of compost would be aerated if you build a lot of horse material.
Yeah, probably. Well, actually, when it goes through that thermophilic phase, it really sucks. And then once you put the worms in, a lot of the work is starting. Is they're doing a lot of work too.
Yeah. Do the worms improve the compost? Will you still get a fungal compost if you don't put worms in it? If, you know, do that rather than
yeah,
worms
you probably would. They might be speeding up the process. That might be a good question to speed it. But then, if you look at the research on phosphorus and nitrogen availability and the humic acid, or the humus that is being produced from the worm casting process, that's pretty significant. So it seems like something you don't want to take out. And also, just from a heat standpoint in Colorado, it seems like that vermicasting process is really what's keeping it warm in the wintertime too. So it's probably, if you didn't have the worms in Colorado, it would take a lot longer. So yeah.
Is there any more standard in the tubes?
No. They're on, so on pallets, you know how there's air that's going through those pallets. So the air is coming underneath those pallets, and then so there's a, you know, there's circulation, passive circulation. Yes, thank you. So a lot of people are using cottonwood, but anything that's kind of from the white, so populus, so that genus. So that's aspen, cottonwood. Willow is probably another one that you could use, but that's just what we've used. And I've noticed too, I mean, I've got a lot of cottonwood, and we have to chip every year just for maintenance reasons. And I've noticed that within I've been paying attention to wood chips, fascinated with them, but you can see the fungal hyphae in, you know, underneath those wood chips. So yeah, it's a powerful, it's a very, very rich source of material to, you know, take advantage of. Yes. So.
And will like spruce and pine species, will they just not work as well, or do they not?
So there's a lot in those species. There's a lot of terpenes, and that can be really kind of a volatile source. So I definitely do not recommend using juniper, or I don't know too much about spruce, but probably not. I would say that there's probably enough volatiles in spruce that would favor the composting.
Takes longer because of the antibiotic properties of the terpenes.
Okay.
You can do it, but then you get a tack on another couple months.
It'll leach it out.
Yeah.
Lots of water. It's too dry.
No, it goes out through the air. Or the microbes consume
Just because the next
convert.
person needs to start from there.
Okay.
Getting their stuff ready. I love the
We're
engagement though. And
I know, I find that we get so many questions, and I'm like,
I'm glad you have time for that. That was perfect.
I know. It's just I've presented enough that I figured that one out.
Helping keep anything getting wrapped up. I think figured out what happened of leaving two computers co-hosting to stop what was happening to you. So
it is fine.
Quick question for you.
Yeah,
One,
absolutely.
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
Yep.
New to this, but I've got about 120 acres and I've got the same type of stuff, same problems, but a lot of the basics that I need to do. If I send you an email, can you push it to the right place?
You can just email it to me and I can hopefully answer your questions. But
okay.
Let me get her.
I'll just send you an email. You got to take care of the things that you got to do. My name is Scott Murdoch. You don't have to remember it. You'll get an email from me that says here's what I do.
Did you get my email address? Perfect. Awesome.
Thanks, Amy.
Yep.
Do you need help with anything? You're fine. You just come yet.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You guys were such a great audience.
Sorry if I was hungry at the beginning.
No. I'm from very
most of
traditional
that
ranching
comes
community.
from water, and ranchers over here were sensitive to water. And we see a huge amount of our water at the headwaters going over the.
Oh yeah.
Of course, it's going to the Denver Metro mostly.
Yeah. I know.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Did you drop your mask?
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Gosh, I was wondering where that was.
I have to run out with my mouth covered.
Do you think you're gonna see camps going away? Because I'm sort of Nevada a lot because those areas are so big and move them.
Do I see what going away?
Camps.
Like the cow camps? No, I don't. Yeah. Where are you from, a ranching family in Nevada?
Yeah, but not as far east as
Oh, okay. Where are you from?
Gerlach.
Okay. Yeah, I know Gerlach.
Yeah.
Cool.
Empire technically.
You're what?
Empire technically.
Okay. Yeah, I know Empire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Nevada. I miss it.
Oh, and also
so
my
much.
ex-boyfriend is a big candidate for the ruminant digestive tract.
Oh my, is it Nate?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Don't
yes.
be.
Really? Don't be excited about it?
No, but that's very funny. Did you work with him? So I'm thinking you were his supervisor.
So I studied under Tamsin Stringer.
Okay.
Yeah. So who is, I think, his advisor?
Yeah,
maybe?
I went to college in Arkansas.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, Nate I've been corresponding with Nate about, because basically I was like, can we please get in on this study? And she's like, yes, we can. So I've been trying to, Tamsin's one of my best friends, but she's so busy. So if I can work with the graduate student, that's always great.
Hey, Danny, how you doing? Good.
Are you presenting?
I am, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
Oh, good to see you.
Same here.
No, Livingston's, they're a big farming and ranching family in Carson County.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is right. Out of Montana.
There is a possibility that I haven't heard of any relations in Montana, but I do know that they've been hunting a lot, so maybe. It's a big family.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
When I thought it.
Not enough diversity
Yeah.
Like into this. Some of those producers aren't necessarily like will be into what you're doing. So it's like, oh, that's cool.
You know what? That is actually it's so shocking that I did a workshop with Nicole and Masters, and the first day we had 12 producers that represented 1.5 million acres.
Wow.
Yeah, they were big scale ranchers, and I was like, hey, really, you guys are here?
Yeah.
So that was
well, maybe just like.
Hey, are you the room
help.
liaison? All right. So yeah, I know they have two folks zooming in.
Okay.
And then I'm kind of jumping in to kind of facilitate.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully jump through them and stuff. So what's your name?
Yeah, I'm Benita, but
Right.
my
we need a new class.
advisor Penelope is getting another computer just because there's an issue with people answering, and then it kind of stops you from going forward in your presentation.
Okay. And I don't have any slides. They'll have some slides that they'll probably share a screen on. But I have a handout, but so this one should be maybe a little smoother.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. We're gonna maybe stop share. Hey, there he is.
Hey there. How's it going?
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I'm guessing we'll probably get started a few minutes late.
It's tricky, but yeah.
Definitely a little battered and bruised, but yeah. How was your presentation? How was the fungal?
It was good.
I missed it, but
I always get asked questions.
yeah, fascinating right now.
It's like hopeful, you know, it's the hopeful part of the job.
I got a 5-gallon bucket of magic dust from Patrick that I'm gonna put on my yard and see what happens. But,
yeah, good. Water it.
Yeah. Some of that, the compost from.
I know they're packaged, but I didn't know it's clean and done.
Well, no.
All right. Thank you so much, Annie. I appreciate your patience with all that.
Good.
Hey, Matt, now I'll take your question.
Well, it was just about where I need to be. Because Callie told me this was being moved to another location.
Yeah.
It's still here, so.
Okay. It does seem.
So I'm supposed to help you the monitor. I'm just asking if I need to assist.
If there's anything, you know, that's a great question.
Are doing that.
Yeah, this is part of it. Yeah.
So yeah, and there's some people who've heard of it.
You take care of the technical issue.
I hope so. I hope so. And Benita has seen what I've had to do as well.
I just need to get a head count basically.
I think that's a good plan, Sam.
Okay.
Hopefully this will. I know, isn't it like my hands? Of course, I just went outside, but
Cover crops.
I don't have internet.
Reduce fertilizer.
I'll try and find the password. Thank you.
1 year. Oh, well. It's pretty impressive.
I guess we'll give it a couple more minutes, huh?
Yeah. Hi, Dan. I'm
Hey,
Penelope.
nice to see you. Meet you.
Yeah.
Actually,
Nice
it's
to
been a
meet
while. We
you.
met before.
I was going to say your name's familiar.
Yeah.
At the last session, we learned of a few
So
tech things.
Eric and Christina have their own slides, and they'll just be sharing. So that might make life a little easier.
Are they not?
Because they're virtual.
They are virtual.
Yeah, and they're both on right now. They can even hear us.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll be the only one sharing slides, Dan. So if that makes it any easier, I don't know, but we won't be going back and forth in any way.
And we got two very important people with us right now, but that's the extent of our audience. So
and Eric, I'm gonna make you a co-host.
Okay.
That hopefully that means you can share your slides. If you want to go ahead and try that, please.
Actually, I think it was working earlier when I tried it, but we'll
okay.
Test for sure.
Oh, there we go. That's perfect.
Looks good.
I did not. No, not very good.
Montrose free Wi-Fi is the best one.
The best one to do.
Yeah, sometimes you just need traffic directors to say where between.
Yeah.
And it's a no password required, so should get you there.
I think we're done then.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Did you drive over in snow or was it?
No. It's cold. I'm like, yes. Well, Jerry didn't recognize you either till. Well, it was like seeing your eyes, and I was like, okay, hold on.
Just see my eyes look like 100 years old. He escaped from the nursing home.
I thought that when I went to the bathroom too. I was like, geez, only the.
I came over for the work society.
Tested on your knee?
So I came over
Or I guess we need someone to kind of enter them.
I drove over Grand Mesa yesterday, did some cross country skiing. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
We'll get started in a minute.
So would this be relevant for like a very small family farm, or is it mostly for larger?
If you're employing anyone, it'll apply to you.
No. I think since they're presenting virtually, maybe this isn't.
Drive home after. There's only so much. Only so much.
Okay.
Maybe we'll give it one more minute. We'll get kind of lost. Year after then she has like well, we'll hand out some. Oh man, we lost Mark. He got scared. I wasn't convincing enough. Okay.
There, go for it, Jerry. Well, I'm going to introduce you. I will.
I think we're good.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm here to introduce Dan Waldvogel.
It's good. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Dan is the Director of External Affairs for the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. Dan leads legislative and policy efforts representing our roughly 20,000 family farm and ranch members and administers the Rural Peer Assistance Network program. He has a diverse background in agriculture where he has raised livestock, practiced meat processing, and produced specialty crops. He is passionate about creating opportunities with the hope of maintaining the stewards of our working lands and livelihood. When he is not working, he enjoys time with his family and spends as much time as possible on his family cow-calf operation. So here's Dan.
Oh, man. Thank you. Man, that's an intro. We also have two other presenters with us today that'll be doing a big part of the presentation. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself and then pass it along to Christina?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Eric Yohe. I am the Outreach Manager for the Colorado Division of Labor Standards and Statistics. We'll talk more about who we are in a little bit, but I will pass it off to Christina Rosette for now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us, especially virtually. I'm Christina Rosette, and I'm a policy advisor at the Colorado Department of Labor Division of Labor Standards and Statistics.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. So this is an update on a bill that passed last year. Senate Bill 87 was brought forward. It was, you know, I will say that I really do believe the intent behind the bill was well-founded. There's we can all agree that there's a long-standing, there's some keys here too, I don't know. Long-standing challenge and inequity when it comes to sometimes the folks that spend their time growing and producing our food. Organization that ideally looks at the community as a whole. And certainly as farm and ranch business owners are a big part of our membership, but we also have an amazing amount of agricultural employees as members as well. I have a ranching background. I worked for a wonderful family in Salida for a great number of years. I've been an ag worker my whole life. Until very recently when I found an amazing woman and actually was able to somehow access some slice of ownership into an ag operation, which was, I think as we know, how huge of a challenge that is for anybody to be able to grow into that without either inheriting it or marrying into it. So I think we need to take all of that into account when we kind of talk about this bill as well, because I think the intentions behind it were very well founded, but some of the challenges that we'll talk about as far as bringing it forward and passing policy that was going to work became a lot more challenging throughout the process. So Senate Bill 87 was introduced right at the beginning of the session. The vast part of the majority of the agricultural community didn't know it was coming, didn't have any information of what was going to be in there. I received it, I think, 2 or 3 days before it was introduced, before the first day of the session last year. And that was kind of the same with a lot of the other ag groups. So there was a pretty big response and criticism that there wasn't a lot of stakeholding that went on at the beginning of the process. And I think that created a lot of challenges throughout the session last year, because it immediately created this challenge of a lot of the ag groups were felt like they were defending themselves, and there was a lot of talking past each other throughout all the negotiations, where we had a lot of trouble finding common ground. So that's at least my perspective on the process. I got plugged into it, immediately, and we really tried to create something that was going to be, I'll use the word disruptive, or very disruptive to the current ag economy. We tried to make that a little less disruptive. So we did oppose the bill as an organization of farmers union, all the way through until pretty much the very end, where we went to a neutral position after negotiating a number of amendments that, in my opinion, improved the bill. So I do have a certain amount of bias here. So just take that for a grain of salt. But I will say that the current administration, and particularly Department of Ag and Department of Labor, have been very cooperative with this, because they were, essentially given the responsibility to draft a number of rules, take on a lot of responsibility for regulating and administrating the bill that the legislature brought through. And I feel like they've been very responsive to agriculture, and I think they've also been very responsive to the advocates that brought forward the bill on behalf of the farm workers in the state. And I think Eric will probably mention a little bit too, what kind of happened was no one was happy at the end of the day, and that's kind of the definition of a compromise, when no one's happy. So that's a little bit of the challenge there, and kind of how some of this went down. So I handed out this fact sheet. I put this together, and we'll see kind of, we'll walk through it. Thank you. As far as the different components that's in the bill and some of the things coming down the pike. This isn't necessarily the place to complain or anything like that around what's in the bill, or what's actually now in statute. It's more about just a little bit of an education session as far as understanding kind of what's going on and what we're working with. So the first part is retaliation and whistleblower protection. Essentially, it was deemed that there was a big necessity to kind of protect folks from retaliation. So now there's what's called a rebuttable presumption in statute. So if ag worker is retaliated against, which it's a fairly broad definition, but it's a demotion, reduced compensation, denial of promotion, being fired, or anything else that adversely affects the employee. That's a pretty broad swath, but essentially, if anything kind of happens within 90 days of an employee asserting a claim, it's essentially guilty until proven innocent for the employer to kind of show that their actions weren't a cause of retaliation. That also extends to family members. So I can't, if I'm upset with Liza, I can't go to her son and tell his landlord that he's, I don't know, has too many dogs in the house, and get him in trouble with his landlord. So that way it kind of protects against being able to threaten a family member to cause someone for action. So that's something I think that's pretty straightforward. I think everybody agree that like people need protected, and that's one of the things that was passed in the bill. Unionizing and organizing is also now allowable. Colorado has what's called the Colorado Labor Peace Act. Before last year, ag workers weren't eligible to be under that. So they weren't allowed to unionize. They also weren't allowed to organize. So two employees couldn't say, hey, we really need a new pair of gloves. Would you go talk to the boss and see if you can get him to buy us or her to buy us some new work gloves? That was actually illegal, and they could actually be somewhat disciplined for that because they weren't allowed to actually organize. So that was another change that brought forward in the bill, that ag workers, agricultural employees were included within the Colorado Labor Peace Act. The two next sections that are kind of big is minimum wage and overtime. And I think I'll let Eric and Christina speak to those changes. But essentially, the one thing with minimum wage is that ag workers actually weren't included in Colorado minimum wage standards either. So you could actually pay somebody under Colorado minimum wage. And if the farm was small enough, you didn't even have to actually pay them federal minimum wage. This brought everybody into the camp, so everybody now has to earn at least the Colorado State prevailing minimum wage. And with overtime, that was probably one of the biggest sources of conflict throughout the bill, because basic ag economics make it very difficult for a lot of agricultural employees to pay overtime at 40 hours or 12 hours a week. I think no matter what you're growing or producing, agriculture is a fairly labor-intensive business. So making that shift was going to be very challenging for a lot of ag operations. At the same time, a lot of folks understand overtime always being 40 hours. So through a compromise, it was negotiated that overtime would be created through a rulemaking process. So the Department of Labor and Employment was tasked with developing those rules. And I should say that if you look at the current rules across the state, there are numerous professions that have unique overtime standards. So agriculture is not just the only unique one in the state. Mechanics, nurses, ski industry, the list goes on and on as far as certain unique rules when it comes to a number of professions. So with that in mind, I'll hand it over to either Eric or Christina. You guys can kind of explain kind of some of these changes, and I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. I want to make sure everyone in the room can hear me all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dan, that was a great job.
The voice of God, Eric.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I sound like the voice of God.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good thing. If you need to turn me down, feel free. Dan, thanks for putting together that summary. I'm walking through, especially the legislative process for the bill. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the timeline, and there was a lot of back and forth last spring, winter and spring, in terms of where SB 87 started and then where it got to when it was ultimately passed and then signed by the governor. Want to talk a little bit about our division first before I go through some of these slides. We are the Division of Labor Standards and Statistics. Our division, going back 100 years, has primarily been responsible for enforcing what you would think of as wage and hour laws and pretty much most labor laws throughout the state. And through the last few years, we've actually gotten more and more responsibilities with different bills that have been passed. We enforce the paid sick leave law, the Healthy Families and Workplaces Act, and we are also enforcing all of the new provisions of last year's Senate Bill 87. I want to make clear, this doesn't have to be the last time you have contact with us. We want to be open. We want to answer all of your questions. You may have new questions after today. I'm going to provide you a bunch of contact information, a lot of information you can find on our website, or you can email me and I can send you all that information. Be happy to. I don't expect, Christina and I didn't learn this whole law in 1 hour. We don't expect you to either. Christina's here because she is the subject matter expert for this bill. She's created a lot of material, a lot of educational material related to the bill, and was heavily involved with the rulemaking process as well. She's here to make sure I don't make too many mistakes, and she's also here to help answer any questions you might have. So Dan summarized this pretty well. The bill eliminated ag exemptions for minimum wage and overtime. Any exemptions there were from meal and rest periods, though over the last few years, there have been some rest period requirements phased in for agriculture. He talked about the unionizing and related activity. There are also some other new rules on work conditions we'll talk about in a little bit, related to heat protection and access to service providers. These are the two that fall under our supervision, our authority. Hoeing and weeding is something that CDA, the Department of Agriculture, enforces. There are also some provisions about housed worker rights, especially when it comes to public health emergencies. Our division was required to do rulemaking, as Dan said, on overtime and heat standards. Primary reason for giving us the authority to rulemaking on overtime, basically meaning setting the standards, is what Dan talked about. There was essentially a compromise in which it was understood that that overtime wasn't automatically going to be the standard 40 hours in a work week or 12 hours in a work day. So that rulemaking came up with what we've put on this really complicated, probably slide here, but I want to walk you through it. I want to show you, if you start from the top, any overtime pay that may be required is delayed through November 1st of this year. It will not start until November 1st of this year. And at that time, and then for a 14-month period, weekly overtime is time and a half after 60 hours a week for all employers. And we'll talk more about what highly seasonal or small employers are in a second. So beginning November of this year, it's 40 hours in agriculture a week for overtime. And of course, overtime is time and a half. Daily overtime goes into effect. It's technically overtime compensation, but it doesn't work exactly like most overtime works. After a 12-hour day, any work in excess of 12 hours in a day will require an additional 30-minute paid rest period, paid break. After 15 hours, employees will be required to be paid an extra hour's pay no matter how long they may work past the 15 hours. Want to make clear that this requirement that goes into effect on November 1st of this year will be the daily overtime requirement. I didn't misstate that, did I, Christina?
Nope, that's correct. That'll be the daily overtime requirement going forward from November 1st.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of talk, at least in the presentations I've been in the conversations I've been in, about the concept of highly seasonal employers and small employers. And there's also an exemption for family farms. That's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. I've got a couple slides that will kind of break down what highly seasonal and small employers are. But the reason they're important is because those will set what an employer has to pay with regard to overtime beginning on January 1st of 2024. So in a peak season, which employers can designate, and we'll talk about that in a second, in peak season, for up to 22 identified weeks, overtime starts at over 56 hours in a work week for highly seasonal employers. Otherwise, it's 48 hours a week for the non-peak season weeks. It's over 48 hours per week. For those who do not meet the highly seasonal definition, it's 54 hours a week overtime in 2024. And then in 2025, it sets at the ongoing 48 hours a week for overtime. Small employers get a little bit of an exception from 2024 on. That threshold is 56 hours a week. I know that's a lot of words. It's a lot of words on the page. There's a lot of words coming out of my mouth, but these are the standards that we'll be enforcing. We expect that our primary enforcement when it comes to this law, and there's a lot of provisions, will be around the overtime piece because we know it's new. We want to help you be compliant. And so any questions you have, feel free to reach out. We will be issuing more publications, more material that will help you. And I'll talk about that in a second. Highly seasonal agricultural employer. Dan actually did a really good job in the last presentation we did together explaining this. I hope I do half as good a job as he did. The way an employer determines whether or not they're highly seasonal, it's an agricultural employer in any 22-week period, which can actually be broken into 2 or 3 periods. That it doesn't have to be a continuous 22-week period. It could be a planning period and a harvest period, or however it may work for you. In that period, that employer must have at least twice as many employees during those 22 weeks total as the rest of the year. That is what defines a highly seasonal employer. Employer must provide an initial disclosure of that overtime will be paid after 56 hours per work week during the peak weeks. And there must be a written notice at least annually in what weeks will be the peak weeks. That notice needs to be provided no later than 7 days before the first peak week. Okay. All required notices must be in English or any language that is the first language spoken by at least 5% of the employer's workforce. When it comes to Spanish, we're already on it, making sure that we work to make sure any of those notices that are required are in Spanish that come from us, our posters. Any sort of posters that we'll be providing, because you will have to post posters as well. If you have any questions about the language requirement, please let us know. And so that was a lot. I want to pause right here if anyone has any questions about the highly seasonal agricultural employer definition.
I think one thing to keep in mind with all of this information is there are no changes until November of this coming year. So this growing season will not have any changes whatsoever to overtime pay. And then starting in November, for November and then all the way through 2023, it'll be at a 60-hour benchmark for overtime. Yeah. So this will phase in. So some of these details of required notice and counting different employees in different peak seasons isn't going to happen until 2024. So I think the number one thing to remember for next year is to track the hours worked by each employee every week that they're working. So at the end of the year, you can count up, you know, how many employees you had each week and how many hours they worked. Yeah. So the 60-hour requirement starts November of 2022. So this next growing season, unless you're growing spinach in a greenhouse or you're chasing sheep around or something, you know, you shouldn't have any impact because it won't start until November 2022, and then it's like a 13-month, I guess maybe 14-month, I guess it would be, period of the 60 hours before things start ratcheting down. Yeah.
So you're saying like this current growing season.
Yeah, because, and Eric will get to it as well, but there are some requirements to track like a few years back of who you've had working and how often, if you're an established operation. So yeah, the more to track, the better, just to really understand exactly where you're at as an employer or as an employee. You know, when I was managing a ranch, I was lucky if I got hours written on a bar napkin. They were usually texted me, and you know, we didn't track it that much. You know, if somebody said they worked 47 hours that week, they got a check for 47 hours. You know, we paid taxes and all that type of stuff with them, but it wasn't that structured. So I think that's going to be one big bump for a lot of employers, is to kind of up the record keeping, because we'll get into some other things with required breaks and hand weeding and some other changes that are coming down the pipe, that it's going to be really important to make sure you're really tracking when folks are on the clock. Yeah, Nick.
Can I just move that whiteboard?
Oh, sure. Eric, can you hear some of these questions?
I think you may need to kind of relay them to us.
I was asked to move a whiteboard.
About what?
I was moving furniture around. Any other questions on highly seasonal or at least next growing season? All right, now we're going to get into the fun stuff because I saw your next slide.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you pointing that out. It seems weird that we're talking about an exemption that won't be going into effect for a couple of years. But it is important now if you are planning on claiming the partial exemption as a highly seasonal agricultural employer, that you know what the standards will be to be able to meet that. How to count employees. Yeah, I'll talk about small employer in a second. How to count employees, whether it's to determine whether or not you are a highly seasonal employer or if you're a small employer, which we'll get to in the next slide. Thanks, Dan, for making me understand I needed to create a new slide from the last time we talked. It seems pretty simple on paper. I'll be honest, I know it may not be simple necessarily starting right away in practice, but to determine how many employees you have in a given work week. If an employee works 35 hours per week or more, that's one employee. Between 15 and 35 hours per week, that's a half of an employee. And work less than 15 hours per week is not counted as an employee. And that's what's going to add up to determine if your up to 22 peak weeks are at least twice as many employees as your non-peak weeks.
So I think one thing to keep in mind here is it's an average of all weeks worked where that employee has worked more than 1 hour or 1 hour or more. So if they came on and they worked for 8 weeks, you wouldn't count the other ones as zeros. You would only count the ones and average the ones that they've worked 1 hour or more. So a little bit of the challenge here is if you hire somebody and they worked 1 week for you at 60 hours, but yet you have somebody that worked for you 48 weeks, and maybe they worked 5 hours or 10 hours a week during the off season and then 60 hours a week during the growing season. That person that worked 48 weeks is actually probably going to count lower than the one person because they would count as one employee because they worked an average of over 35 hours a week. So it's a little wonky with the way it kind of adds up. I probably really confused people by that statement. But if you look at if you average things together, it gets a little challenging.
Thanks, Dan. And then thanks for bringing that up. I tried to simplify it as much as I could. I probably should have mentioned that you're counting when an employee has at least 1 hour of work in the work week. That same counting method, if we have anyone in the audience that may qualify this to the small employer definition, employed fewer than 4 employees on average over the 3 prior calendar years, and has an average adjusted gross income of no more than $1 million over the 3 years prior to 2024. And you noticed in that chart, which I'll go back to, small employer essentially will follow the 60-hour rule through 2024, and then we'll begin a 56-hour overtime rule. And I think, because the next piece moves away from overtime. So I first want to give Christina a chance to let me know if I messed anything up or would like to clarify anything I talked about.
Nope, all sounded good to me. I'll just add that there are also a few general exemptions from overtime that we aren't covering in the slides, but family members of owners of agricultural employers are exempt from overtime. There's different requirements for range workers. They are required to be paid a weekly salary and not an overtime amount. And a new category of exempt managers at livestock employers if they have certain duties that make them a high level manager. So these, what we described about the small employers and the seasonal employers, just determine what what number of hours in a week trigger overtime, but there's a few types of ag workers that also are fully exempt from overtime requirements.
So, Christina, you would not count a family member when you're counting up your employees for determining small employer or highly seasonal? They just wouldn't be added to the spreadsheet, correct? You'd only be adding up the employees that you're paying that don't meet one of those exemptions?
No, if they're employees, they're not exempt from the counting, but they wouldn't. It might not be the case that that you'd apply the small employer exemption or the small employer definition if you only employ family and they're exempt from all overtime. But they're treated the same as other. If they're an employee of the employer, then they're part of the count, but they might have different overtime requirements that apply.
So if I have me and my 5 sisters, and we are all W-2 employees of a family operation, and then we have one hourly employee that's a non-family member, and we work throughout the year, so we average up higher than 4 employees, we would not be considered a small employer?
You wouldn't be considered a small employer, but everyone except for that non-family member would be exempt from any overtime payment, but that other employee would not be.
Okay.
And I'm assuming that these people are working full time when you're talking about 5 people, and that the counting rules apply. But
yeah, I'm just verifying that family members, managers of a livestock operation that meet that other exemption, owners, anybody earning a salary on that operation needs to be counted as an employee with their hours tracked in order to average how they count in that formula.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, that's a good clarification.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. Thank you, Christina. So I'm going to move on to a couple things.
Eric, if you don't mind, can I interrupt you one more second?
Yeah, of course.
Oh man, you're gracious. I think one other thing to remember about the small employer definition being that it needs to be less than 4. That means that you might have a market garden or a market farmer. They might have 6 employees that are working during the peak season. But if you have some folks that are averaging some hours during the off season at a very low rate, you very well may fit within that 6 because you would average all of that. And as long as that average with that formula is under 4, it might be 3.9. You would fit within the small employer definition. So it's not less than 4 employees total that you have throughout the year. It's the way that it averages up, if that makes sense. So you might have more than 4 at one time during a busy week or during a peak season.
So to clarify, the small employer definition is based on hours worked divided by the employees falling under 4.
Do you hear that, Eric or Christina?
So within the 1 year time, as long as the employees' hours divided by the employees is less than what 4 full-time employees would be through the season, through this entire calendar year.
Yes, it'll be if Eric, if you're able to go back to the counting slide, it's a bit more of like an approximation of hours to kind of count, classically full-time employees as 1, part-time as half. So it's using that metric and not, exactly how many hours for each employee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So let's say I hire Jim, Susie, and Bob. I would track each of their hours for every week they worked. And then I would average those to see how many hours they worked throughout the year. Each of them would add up to either between 15 and 35 or over 35. And then I would know the number to apply to make that count. So if they worked on average over 35 hours throughout the year, for every week that they worked at least 1 hour, they would count as a 1. But some people you know, might only work, you know, they might work high hours during peak season, but maybe they come and do some maintenance or the pack shed, or they water cattle in the winter and they're working really low hours. That could lower their average a little bit. So they might fit within that 15 to 35 mark. If that makes sense. Well, and luckily we have some time to like think through how this is going to work, because there won't be any changes next year to having to count it. All right, go take it away, Eric. Sorry.
Yeah, and thanks, Dan. And what we're learning as we do these presentations, we're able to talk to folks and get questions. We're learning that the types of examples we need to provide in the materials that we publish. This, I think we just got 3 or 4 examples we can work with that we can publish in some of our materials as we're going forward. This is new to all of you, but it's also new to us as well. And so we're learning the best way to help you, and we hope to continue to do that in the coming weeks and months and years. Dan talked about this a little bit. SB 87 does require that our division adopt rules with regard to heat-related stress, illnesses, and injuries. And SB 87 mandates certain access to key service providers. We are issuing rules because we must on both the access to key service providers and the heat-related stress, illness, and injuries piece in what's called our labor conditions rules. And those rules will be published and they'll be adopted. Well, those rules will be published and adopted but either next week or no later than January 31st. And those rules will go into effect. The heat-related and service provider rules will go in effect this year, May 1st. So I would make sure you kind of pay attention to those rules being published. We proposed rules back in 2021. We'll be adopting those rules. We'll probably have made a couple changes, a few changes to what the proposed rules were. But note that once those rules are out, and we'll be publishing on our website, we'll be making them available. These go into effect this year. So this is, in a lot of ways, is more urgent than the overtime piece. Okay.
So real quick, I'll speak to the current proposed rules. So I run the risk of spreading misinformation, so take this with a grain of salt. But based on the proposed rules right now, essentially, when it's 80 degrees or warmer, so during the growing season, employees need to have access to fresh, cool water in adequate amounts, which is all listed in the rules, and also access to either artificial or natural shade while they're on their rest breaks and cool down periods. And then when there's additional hazards out there, so 95 degrees or hotter, unhealthy air quality, long days, maybe you're having to wear like protective equipment that prevents you from being able to cool yourself. And a couple other factors there. You need to provide some mandatory rest breaks. I think it's 10 minutes every 2 hours. So essentially, there's a lot to the heat stress rules. There's also some required trainings and monitoring systems and protocols that employers need to establish to make sure that there's a lifeline there if someone's in trouble. But at the end of the day, if you're providing water, you're providing shade or another way to cool yourself, like an air-conditioned vehicle for a break or water cooling garments or something like that. And then when it's, you hit those other conditions, you're providing at least a cool down period. That's the bulk of it. I mean, there's some details I don't want to like gloss over it either, but that essentially, from what I understand, that's likely what will be adopted next week. And as Eric said, there are some changes that very well could happen. So don't take my word for it just yet.
Thanks, Dan. Christina, do you want to talk any more about the, at least in generalities, about the rules we'll be adopting?
Yeah, Dan's summary covered pretty much the key points. So there's more detail in the rules, but it's water and shade when it's 80 degrees or hotter. We give explanation in the rules about outdoor work sites. You can use a forecast. Indoor work sites, you can look at the actual temperature or a goal temperature. If you're trying to you need your greenhouse to be a certain temperature, you would rely on that. There's details about, how much water, different types of shade you can provide. But we tried to, write the rules in a way of flexibility with, knowing that people are going to handle things different ways. Some people might want to give out water bottles to employees, or for some people, it might be easier to bring a big cooler and have individual cups. So there's general requirements, but flexibility in how you meet them. And then, once a year, there's a training requirement, and there's the emergency procedures, and just having like a point person or a buddy system for employees to just check up on each other. If anyone starts showing symptoms of heat stress, that, they can take a rest from work to feel better. But the rules that are proposed, there's not going to be much changes in the adopted version, hopefully just kind of some clarifying things. So but those are the key components of the heat rules.
Thank you. Any questions related to those rules? I know you don't have the specifics in front of you, so it may be hard to ask additional questions.
They have some propaganda in front of them for the fact sheet I made.
Okay.
You guys will be issuing your fact sheet once those are adopted as
Yeah.
well.
And thank you, Dan, because I want to talk about that. I will, and I don't know the best way for this to be distributed, but I will be sending these slides. I'm not sure who I will be sending them to, but I will be creating a PDF and sending these slides if they can be distributed to the folks in the room or the folks who are at the conference today. That would be fine with us. We will be reissuing our fact sheet. We call them infos, and it just happens, it's a random number. It happens to be info number 12. But I want to make clear that we will be continuing to work on essentially compliance assistance guidance through the next weeks, through the next months. There may be several fact sheets that will essentially compile on different topics related to overtime, the health condition rules and service provider access rules. Specifics to agricultural workers in terms of how what they have to be provided in terms of rest periods and how overtime works, like we talked about, that's different from employees of other types of employers in the state. But we will be looking to publish very specific information that we hope is something that is in a very digestible method, digestible media, easy for you to understand. And I would be the person, if we issue something that you don't think it makes sense, needs to be clarified, please reach out to me. My contact information is going to be in the last slide. Please reach out to me. And please reach out to me with any questions you have about any of the issues we talked about today. But I will be making this available. These are the key resources that are available on our website. We can also send them out by mail if we need to, or send them to you if we need to. But agricultural labor condition rules, those are what will be published by January 1st or January 31st, excuse me. That info will be updated and released in February is our plan. Most of the rules, or a good chunk of the rules that we had to promulgate, especially when it comes to overtime, minimum wage, and related type of information, is available in our Colorado overtime and minimum pay standards order. Now, this is an order that is applicable to all employers across the state in a variety of ways, but there is this, and most of the rules in the comps order will apply to you and your employees, but there are also the agricultural specific rules. And I wanted to point that out, that's rule 2.3. That's available now. Comps order 38 has been in effect since January 1st of this year. It covers, among many things, overtime, minimum wage, meal breaks, and rest periods. And then we also have a fact sheet that's out now, available now, that kind of summarizes some of the key provisions of the comps order, and it's a good resource as well. So those are the main resources we have available right now, but we will be working on more as well.
Great. So I'm going to speak to two other components of the bill, but I just remembered one thing I should highlight that we really need to create awareness around too. And this has been in existence in the comps order, the Colorado Overtime Minimum Pay Standards order for many years. If you are an agricultural employer and over 50% of your sales essentially go direct to the public, so let's say you sell directly to the farmer's market or you sell steaks online, you're not covered under the other overtime rules. You're actually required at 40 hours, 40 hours a week, 12 hours a day. So that's something to keep in mind, because I don't think that's really been on very many people's radar over the years.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And that's right. That's not part of SB 87. That's not part of any new agricultural labor rules. That is something that's been in effect for quite some time, because any employer, regardless of industry, going back at least a couple decades, whose primary source of revenue, or if their source of revenue is at least 50% in the retail space, selling directly to consumers, those employers, whether or not they're farms or in agriculture, have for a very long time been required to comply with minimum wage, overtime at 40 hours and 12 hours in a workday.
Got a question from Nick.
Yeah. What was the rulemaking process?
What was the rulemaking process? Oh, it was a joy, wasn't it?
It was. So, and I apologize, I should have explained that a little bit better. So, as a government agency, we have laws, of course, that we have to enforce. And a lot of times when there's new laws, they require us, and the bills always use this fancy word, they require us to promulgate rules, which basically means we have to make rules that apply and implement the specific new statutes. And so in this case, we were required to promulgate rules, go through rulemaking for the labor conditions rules and for overtime specifically. And so though the rulemaking process is governed by another set of laws called the Administrative Procedure Act, and we follow those rules. So generally the steps were beginning last spring into summer. We started meeting with stakeholders. We had a large informal stakeholder meeting. We actually had a couple of those. And then we also, so that was all before rulemaking officially started. And then in September, we proposed the rules for overtime. And then we had hearings. Can't remember exactly when we proposed the labor conditions rules. It was later than September. And then we had hearings on those as well. The public was able to attend virtually or in person, and taking all the comment. And we also, during that entire process, we sought comments from stakeholders, anyone involved who wanted to comment on what the rules should be. And we took all of that into account, and that's what created our overtime, that big, crazy, busy chart I showed you earlier. That's what created the overtime rules, and that's what led to creation of the rules that we're going to post either this week or on January 31st. So I don't know if that's exactly what your question was, but that's kind of how the rulemaking process works. I can assure you we followed the standards that Colorado law requires us to, and I believe we went really above and beyond that as well.
And I think the thing to remember is this number right here, number 38. The thing about rules is they're a lot more flexible than statute. So it's possible from time to time to reopen a rulemaking process on things. So as this rolls out a couple of years down the road, if folks can provide that the rules aren't working for one reason or another, it's too hard for agricultural employees to comply with, it's not protecting workers, whatever it is, there's potential for rectifying that a little easier than going back through the legislature. It's not an easy process, and as Eric just explained, it's pretty complicated, and it takes sometimes some very particular levers to reopen rulemaking. But that's the benefit of having rules is ideally they can be tailored and adjusted later if they're not working perfectly. I don't know if you'd agree with me, Eric, or not.
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. Understand that once rules are set, unless there are, I don't know if any of our rules will, except for one exception, are necessarily triggered or have any requirements to quote open them up going forward. But in my 10 years with the division, there have been many occasions where we realized that, hey, we need to make a tweak. The rule we made maybe isn't clear, maybe it's not doing what we thought it would do, and we've made adjustments throughout the years. And when we notify the public of rulemaking, it's available on our website. We go through the process with the Secretary of State's office, letting them know that we're going to be issuing new rules or considering new rules, and we seek public comment on that. But yeah, in my time here, we have made changes, particularly to the comps order. It used to be called the minimum wage order. We have made rules when we realized that, hey, maybe last year what we wrote wasn't quite as clear as we intended it to be. Of course, we want it to be perfect the first time we publish it, but that's not always the case.
So real quickly, just a couple things on the last page. Hand weeding. Now, hand weeding, this was a big part of the bill, was the short-handled hoe. So if any of you have understanding going back to the history of ag labor, starting with a lot of the stuff that came out of California with predominantly Filipino farm workers, there's a very torrid history when it comes to the short-handled hoe. And honestly, from my perspective, it's been a very destructive tool when used incorrectly or used for the wrong reasons. Now, California has been trying to figure out how to manage the use of the short-handled hoe for many years. In the 70s, they outlawed it. Then there was kind of a workaround. Well, we're just going to have folks weed by hand. And then there was people who were still in the same position day in, day out, doing a lot of hand weeding, which was just as bad or worse than using the short-handled hoe. Now, I've talked to a lot of small market farmers that use the short-handled hoe very selectively, where they use a long-handled hoe as long as they can, and then they use a short hoe, and then they hand weed, and it's, in their opinion, the most effective use of their time and their bodies. Essentially, because this was such a hot button issue and a challenge, there wasn't really negotiation on the judicious use of that tool. So from here on out, if you have a tool that is less than 18 inches long with a horizontally affixed blade to it, you are not supposed to use it. Now, other hand tools are fine, but that is the prohibition of short-handled hoe went into effect with this bill. Now, because of those historic workarounds in other states for hand weeding, there was also a requirement that employees cannot hand weed more than 20% of their weekly time unless they fit these categories that I have listed here. And these were all listed in statute for hand weeding or hand thinning. So if you're a certified organic or you're tending seedlings or some of these other ones that are here, those are exemptions, and your employees could hand weed more than 20% of their time. there was some concern that maybe this wasn't inclusive enough for certain operations, such as maybe you're not certified organic, but you're low chemical and you're using regenerative practices, so you still have more weed management challenges. Or maybe you want to certify organic, but you're in that transition period. It takes 3 years of records using organic methods before you can actually certify. So there was an agreement that was made that the Department of Agriculture could adjust some rules, create some rules for developing a variance, so you can essentially get an exemption from the 20% hand weeding times. In order to do that, these rules will also, I don't know if they've officially been adopted, but they will also go into effect January, or they will be adopted no later than January 31. But essentially, in order to get that variance, you need to prove a few things. You need to show that hand weeding or thinning is not prolonged or unnecessary, so you don't have essentially an alternative. And then also that you have an integrated weed management plan. So there's maybe some stuff you're doing with cultivation, or you're desiccating the weeds with a flame burner, or you're using certain other practices throughout the entire year to not just rely on people hand weeding, and that's your only way of doing weed management. So you have to demonstrate a number of things, and then you can qualify for that variance. Also, something that's required is some additional paid rest periods for workers while they're hand weeding and thinning. So that's essentially 5 minutes an hour is kind of the requirement, which is, but really it's that get up, take a stretch, move around. And I know we're working really hard with CSU and some other organizations and agencies around how can we provide more education on ergonomic health and injury prevention, and make sure that folks aren't in positions where they're going to be, broken down when they're middle-aged because they've been working their bodies to the bone. So that's something that is also coming forward, and it was a challenge to kind of figure out how to regulate a tool, to be honest. But that's kind of what came out of it. And also there is some requirements for providing like gloves and knee pads and protective equipment for folks that are hand weeding. The other thing that is in the bill, the last thing I'll mention, is employer provided housing. So this is during a public health emergency. We are still under a public health emergency in the state. So that has not been rescinded. So effective immediately, if you have employee housing, you have some requirements for the square footage in your house. And the one big challenge right now is 120 square foot for combined area per worker. So right now we're in a room probably, 800 square feet. There's not a lot of homes out there that have this much space. And how many people would that be divided 800 by 120? Not too many. So it's gonna be a little challenging for folks that have employee housing this year, unless something kind of gets modified on this. Also, at the same time, these rules or this bill is passed with good intentions to protect people. So you have to take that into account as well with the challenges of it. There's also some required safety training on this stuff too, that's going to need to go into effect. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be, I know Farmers Union, big priority is how do we effectively work with our public stewards, with our agencies like Department of Labor, Department of Ag. How do we work with land grants like CSU and other nonprofits, and then other organizations working on behalf of farm workers? How do we kind of consolidate this information and create almost essentially a portal to make sure that ag employees have all the information and training and resources possible to them, they understand all the rights that are afforded to them, but then also how can employers comply without kind of feeling like they're in the dark and they're worried they're breaking the law one way or the other. Because I think there's a lot of changes that are coming down the pipe. So how do we kind of make that as seamless as possible? Because it will be, I think disruption is a fair word to say. I mean, it will be a change to certain ag operations. So I think that's really where we're working and hoping to kind of gain consensus across the board, no matter where you stand on this issue, that we really need to educate before we regulate on a lot of this stuff. So how can we really create some skills or some resources and make sure that that's all available. So with that, that's about all I got. Eric or Christina, I don't know if you want to mention anything else, or if there's any other questions here. If not, we're going to eat some lunch.
Good. That sounds great to me as well. Just a couple quick things. Thank you so much for attending and asking the questions that you have and being proactive in learning about this information. Couple things I want to mention. The easiest way to find out information from our division is to go to coloradolaborlaw.gov. That is where pretty much anything we've talked about does live. And I also wanted to provide very quickly, questions can be emailed to us. We do have a call center that is open during the week. And I'm also providing you folks with my email address and phone number. If you have any specific questions you'd like to ask, feel free to reach out. I will be sending these slides to the organizers of this conference, and hopefully they'll be able to distribute those as well. But thank you again so much. Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Christina, for being on as well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
We got one question here. Yeah, I just wanted to go back one slide. Oh, sure. Eric, would you mind going back one slide?
One slide, yeah, I can do that.
And we'll also have all this on the RMFU website with these links as well. And they're on there now. They're just evolving a little bit.
I was just curious. I mean, you kind of answered it, but farmer for education and posting, you know, like right now we post, you know,
yeah,
we don't discriminate, all these things we post in employee. Will this be added to it?
Yeah, there are some required postings. Eric or Christina, do you want to mention any of those? I have it written here too.
Yeah, I can speak to that to some extent. Christina may want to talk about some agriculture specific notices, but all Colorado employers are required to post or provide, if there's not the ability to post, what's called the COMP, the Colorado Overtime and Minimum Pay Standards poster. And that's available on our website. We can also mail one out to you if you don't have the ability to print one. And also the paid sick leave law that's been in effect since January 1st of 2021, called the Healthy Families and Workplaces Act, requires posters, as another bill called Public Health Emergency Whistleblower Act. So there's two posters, primary posters. One's the wage law poster, the comps poster. The other is the paid sick leave retaliation poster. And like I said, you know, in your business, you may not have the ability to post posters where employees are going to be, but you must at least provide them notification of the information that's in those posters.
Yeah, and specific to agriculture, SB 87 has a requirement that employers post notice of some of the other employee rights that are specific to agriculture, like the heat protections, service provider access, things like that. So that's been a requirement, you know, just as part of the bill. And to help employers comply, we're going to be creating a poster that includes what needs to be posted. That'll probably be coming shortly after the info. And it'll kind of just be an abbreviated version of, you know, the types of things we discussed here about things other than wage and hour requirements. So there's that poster requirement. And then during a public health, during a public health emergency, part of the information that employers need to provide, I think Dan mentioned that there's, you know, some training requirements. Employers also have to provide copies of or information or pamphlets about guidance for public health emergency safety procedures. And so what we did is in the rules, in a different set of rules, we just kind of had a link to, here's an OSHA site, you can use these materials. Here's a CDPHE site, you can use those materials. So there's the poster that'll be coming up, and then just the requirement that you make available to employees guidance about safety precautions during a public health emergency.
Thanks, Christina.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you guys. We appreciate it. And,
well, thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
We always get fed really well here at Food and Farm Forum, so I'm sorry that you can't be here in person. But...
Maybe I can come. Maybe we can come out next year.
All right. The date.
All right. Sounds good.
Right.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So essentially the definition of an ag employer is really broad. So it's interns, it's even if you're contracting with somebody that has employees, like a contract crew, you're technically considered an ag employer. If you really dig deep enough, United Airlines is considered an ag employer because they're contracted to bring H-2A workers from their home country in the States. So it's a little broad. I think it is gonna be a little interesting of the way that like interns work, like through the Ag Workforce Development Program, or
so even like say they get paid $600 a month, that may be legal, but they still have to follow the other requirements, like the work requirements. Like how would they get like overtime? You know, because it's kind of like in their contract. It usually specifically says like you can work as many hours and you still only get paid this amount.
I have a
solid I don't have a solid answer.
Members in particular. I wondered about that too, how that works.
I'd be happy to find out the answer because that really wasn't spoken that much, but like it's an issue across the board if it's new agrarian folks, you know, or anybody that's kind of working on a contract basis. But I mean, I would think that in a lot of ways the answer is we need to be tracking their hours and they still need to meet that minimum wage requirement, some of the others. But I would think maybe in the future there might be some level of an educational component where that might be some level of exemption if you're gaining educational experience out of that internship. But I don't quite know.